these players were walking over to sort of applaud the fans, and just this look on Purcell's face of, oh my goodness, these fans are singing to us and we've lost. Like, what is going on? Is it actually us that they're singing to? And I think by the end of it, he, along with several others, were actually standing on the wall with the fans singing Old Faithful.
Wow.
There's just flash memories that you have. And
yeah. You get some real special moments, don't you, in those sorts of games?
Yeah, because it was real backs against the wall type thing. And, basically we had nothing to lose in that match, because if we lost by 60, well, it was those young kids.
Yeah.
And it was the classic as well. We were walking back over the bridge towards the cars, singing as we went, and this Leeds fan turned around and said, but they lost. Why are they singing? And, there are times when it's not about the result, is it?
No. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, yeah. I mean, at Wigan, I've not, to be honest, not had too many of those sorts of
I'm sure Tim will understand a lot better.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's that way something stupid or little happens that just galvanizes everybody and takes you, because that's all you've got to cling to.
Yeah, it was as Horn made a tackle on McDermott coming storming, not McDermott, the other prop forward that was huge and as wide as he was high. Played for Leeds. I can't think of his name now.
Anthony Farrell was pretty wide.
Maybe it was Anthony Farrell.
He might not have been at Leeds by that stage, though. I can't remember.
Whoever it was, he was charging down at Richard Horn, and it was David versus Goliath type thing. And he either tripped over his bootlace or Horn tackled him. We weren't sure which.
Yeah.
Sorry, to answer your question about mate.
Yeah.
I mean, he came in as, well, in many senses, he ended up being Swain's replacement. I mean, we had signed Berrigan, but he ended up being a little bit injury prone, and Houghton ended up getting the nod ahead of him, really.
Yeah, because Berrigan's a player. He won the Clive Churchill for the Broncos. I think possibly only a year or two before he came over to you guys. He was a player we expected a lot from, wasn't he? And he didn't quite deliver, did he? But mate did, and continues to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be spelling him, because he's just not as young as he once was. I don't know whether, I think it was his amateur club, but Dad was chatting to his coach once and said about him, he said, the problem is he's got no brain, so he'll just tackle anything that's in front of him. So that's why he always makes so many tackles.
From the one time I met him, that doesn't shock me too much, to be completely honest with you. A player who played for your club and played for my club for a couple of years, Sarah, that is my kind of guilty pleasure hooker. That was my favourite player, one of my favourite players at that time, just because it was when Wigan were a poor side, 2005, 2006. So his whole time with Wigan was when we weren't very good. And I'm not saying he was very good, but in that team, he just was the only player who seemed to play with much pace and enthusiasm. And he's carried that on into his life after playing, and that's Wayne Godwin. And I always really loved Wayne Godwin, and certainly by no means is he in the same realms of Wigan hookers as Terry Newton or as I mean, even I'd have like so if James Roby's the sort of rich man's James Roby, and Ben Fisher, let's say, is the poor man's James Roby, I would say Sam Powell is the lower middle class versus James Roby, and I really do rate Sam Powell more than a lot of Wigan fans have done over his time, and I really like Sam Powell, and I would have him and McAlorum definitely above Wayne Godwin, but God, that kid had so much enthusiasm when he played in that Wigan team, that poor Wigan team in that era. So I wanted to make a mention from him, from like my personal point of view, like the guys you were talking about, Sarah, from sort of your earlier the earlier memories of guys. Another player we haven't talked about yet right? And it's because it's hard to think of him as a hooker, but his best ever moments surely came as a hooker. The 2011 Grand Final, Harry Sunderland Trophy winning Rob Burrow came off the bench at hooker, transformed that game, scored that iconic try. So where do we stand on Beep Beep as a hooker? We've had Bowser, we've now got Beep Beep, Roadrunner.
I loved him as a hooker. I always consistently said that was, I thought, his position where he excelled. That season where they went through about 3 or 4 different players at hooker who just kept getting injured, and then they ended up with him playing there for quite a lot more of the games than they were intending. That's, to me, where he came into his own as a player. I think especially where he could come off the bench and come and spell whoever was as the starting hooker, and then really inject something in where he had that the pace and vision. He could come on and just come all over it, really. And I think that was where he was at his best for me.
Yeah, he was certainly that hooker who would, come right up the middle, right at you, sort of thing. But then the flip side of that is he never defended in the middle, did he? So, I guess that's why it's was he just the most dynamic dummy half, but never really a hooker? kind of is the thing, isn't it, with Rob Burrow? And then the other Leeds hooker who won a man of the match in a grand final, Matt Diskin, he played for so much of that glory time. And I remember that time sort of from me getting my first season ticket in 2000 to Wigan winning that first grand final for a long time in 2010. That decade was a decade of so many great hookers in our game. I mean, it started with Jackson still being around and Cunningham being at the peak of his powers. His 4 grand finals at the start of that period he won, whereas he lost his last 4 to Kieran Cunningham. I hope that's not a quiz question that I've given away, but it might be. But so we had Lowe's as well in that time at the top of his game, and then you had coming through from that Newton, you had then you had Roby coming in. In the background of all that was Mickey Hyam, who was no one's fool, was he? He was a fantastic player. And I know that I'm missing people as well. And another player who played during that time but shot himself in the foot. 2 other players, sorry, emerged during that decade but shot themselves in the foot, was obviously towards the end of that decade Scott Moore. He ruined his unbelievable potential as another player that came through the Saints system in that position. And also Ryan Hudson. Do you remember Ryan Hudson from Castleford and Huddersfield?
Yes.
He had one amazing year at Huddersfield, and I think then he went to Bradford but got done for taking some painkillers he shouldn't have been, that weren't on the approved list, and had a 2-year ban, and kind of obviously took him out of the game a bit. But I think for a couple of years, he played a bit of 13 as well, but for a couple of years there at Huddersfield, when I think it was him and, was it Brad Drew or no, was that his name? The Aussie guy, bald Aussie guy, who they were very, very good together. And then you had Sean Lunt emerge at the end of that period as well. It's another very, very good British hooker. All through that period, we had that decade. You had these great guys at the start, these emerging talents at the end, and obviously Cunningham and Roby throughout almost the whole of it. It just felt like a real peak time, but I always felt like we could never get to an international series where we had 2 of them fit.
Yeah.
So we were always like playing Newton and spelling him with, Farrell or Sculthorpe or someone, and then O'Loughlin made his debut off the bench as a hooker, spelling I think Cunningham or Roby, but one of the 2 of them. And Sinfield played
Richard
a game
Horne
or 2
played at hooker for a game.
Sorry?
Richard Horne played at hooker for a game for Great Britain.
Yeah, exactly. It never felt like all these great hookers we had were ever fit to actually make that assault on the Aussies and the Kiwis.
Is that because as a position, it's the place where you get battered and you pick up injuries because you're the target at every play?
Well, Horne did say he's never been so exhausted playing any one position. So, if you've got that level of fatigue, you are more likely to pick up the injuries, aren't you?
You have to be fit, and that's why when there was more interchanges in the game, sort of spelling hookers became the way people did it, wasn't it? And there's some hookers that I don't think would have survived. Like, I don't think Michael McAlurum's the force he was now, even though he has the odd, like, really strong, powerful game, because he could put all his energy into, like, 20 minutes and have someone else put in, someone more steady maybe as well, like when he had, what's his name, who used to put his arm out for the kicks? Piggy Riddell, or or the other guy before him who was the other Aussie that we had before him. I can't remember, but he had people who were more consistent players to spell him, so he could come out there and fly out of the line and make his big hits and try and do all the stuff he tried to do. Whereas now Sam Powell is an 80-minute hooker, and it's a difference. And that's just at my club, and I think we've all seen it, haven't we? Danny Houghton at your club, in a way, has impeded the development of other players because he's an 80-minute hooker. Roby, once Cunningham retired, and in fact, when Cunningham was still playing, Roby was the guy who could play the minutes, and Roby would be on the pitch for 70 minutes and 60, 70 minutes, and now then was a great 80-minute hooker until now they've realised he's getting old. We've got Aaron Smith, let's play him. And that's working out brilliantly. One
person that I haven't mentioned who was... Do you remember when there was that period of time that the Super League finished a lot later than the NRL, and we brought over all those Australians, like, for the last 5 matches of the season?
Oh, when Morley came back and played for Bradford, and Andrew Johns came for Warrington.
Yeah, Joey came over.
Yeah, and all of that time. I think Swain had got injured, and we brought over Dean Treaster, and he was one of those players that when you mentioned Godwin just made me think of him. He was he just fell in love with, like, the whole club and fan interaction that I guess that they don't get in Australia in the same way. And his first match was going to be away at Castleford, and every time he got up to do any stretches or anything, the fans all started singing and cheering, and it really brought that enthusiasm and that sort of relationship back with the fans and the players. And he was one of those players that never gave you less than 100%.
Yeah.
Even though he maybe wasn't the greatest player ever.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, like Wayne Godwin. Exactly. You made the right comparison.
Yeah.
The problem with Wayne Godwin is I've seen too much of him.
Yes. In all ways. I mean,
in all ways, yeah.
We've seen less of the average hooker than we have of Wayne Godwin. But the other player, I suppose, we've not really talked about and was mentioned at the top by your dad, Sarah, is arguably the in-form hooker of Super League in 2020 when things came to a hiatus. Is certainly leading the Man of Steel voting, and that's Paul McShane, a very clever, crafty player who probably needed a lot longer than others to develop into a real force. But the last 3 years under Darryl Powell and Ryan Sheridan didn't have a hat on during that game against Sheffield against PSG. I didn't know what to do. He ran out with no hat on. Then I watched the '98 grand final, no hat on.
What?
Oh, I didn't know.
So we need to try and work out a timeline of when whatever it was happened that made him put the hat on.
Yeah. But yeah, Paul McShane, I suppose, is the leading hooker this year, isn't he? And that's another good player, clever player, good kicking game. Probably one of the best kicking games of all the players, short kicking game of all the players we've talked about.
And has got a real turn of pace on him.
Surprisingly fast, yeah.
I remember mentioning this when we did the 200th episode, actually, because I think had we just played Cass, or did I watch Cass on TV? I can't remember. One of the two. Was it that
game where he'd scored that breakaway try against Wakey, maybe?
Possibly. I can't quite remember, but I just remember being genuinely shocked by how fast he was.
It was real genuine shock.
I just was not anticipating it at all.
Because I think we've covered the load there now, and I don't think anyone can be too disappointed. I've got the quiz to come up now.
There's one we haven't mentioned is Josh Hodgson.
Oh, of course, yeah, England's incumbent. I mean, Hodgson played slightly fewer games internationally than Roby, but they're about the same. It's very, very similar between the two of them internationally.